Hello and welcome to the oddschecker Premier League preview video and podcast. I am your host, George Elek, and I'm joined by two expert guests to run through, all the anti-post markets for the Premier League. It's about to start again. It feels like I was speaking to these two about the Champions League final pretty much yesterday, but here we are on the dawn of a new season. Joining me today is football writer and editor at the Blizzard, Jonathan Wilson, and WhoScored's Martin Laurence. How are you guys both doing? Are we excited for the return of the Premier League, despite the fact there'll be no one there to see it?
Yeah, I just could have done with a longer break, but it is what it is, as Harry Kane would say, and we try and maintain energy levels through the end of the Euros.
Well, Jonathan, it's the 7th of September, and we were speaking a second ago about your cricket. I think more time off and the pitches will get even worse. So, you need to be doing something a little bit better for your sporting exploits. Martin, what's going on over at WhoScored at the moment? Must be a busy time.
It is. Don't want to give too much away, but yeah, it's very busy. No time to plan, no time to do much at all, really. So yeah, it's all a bit manic, but hopefully this is a one-off. Yeah. Fingers
crossed. Next time it will be back to normal at the beginning of a season. But let's look now at the betting markets. We're going to start with the Premier League winner, of course, then move on to the kind of top four, or without Man City and Liverpool market, into the top six, maybe the look at the top half, and then down into the relegation battle before touching on the top goal scorer market, and then also the always popular sack race. Let's talk first then about the top of the table. Liverpool absolutely romped home last season by 18 points. It should have been more, but they dropped a few points towards the end of the season. So surely they're favourites. Nope. Man City, odds-on favourites to win the Premier League next season at around about 8-11. Liverpool 9-4. We'll go into the other teams in a second, but let's focus on those top two. Of course, when you're listening to this podcast or watching the video, make sure you download the oddschecker app. All these prices are the best prices on the app with all the major bookmakers. You can also find the best tips, the best bookie offers. Everything you need is right there. So do download the app now. Jonathan, come to you first here. City odds on favourites, Liverpool 9-4. I mean, do you agree with this idea that City are going to either make that ground up or Liverpool are going to come back to the pack?
I think City will be better and I think Liverpool will be worse. Whether those move sufficiently to take City ahead of them, that's what I'm less sure about. Yeah, I think the defensive issues City had last season, the 9 defeats they suffered in the league last season were all fundamentally for the same reason, that they're incredibly vulnerable to that ball in behind the defensive line. I'm not sure signing Nathan Ake will solve that in and of itself. I think there's something's gone wrong with the whole mechanism of their pressing, and clearly personnel were an issue last season at the back. I think they need more than Ake to solve that, but I think they've got a problem in midfield as well. If Fernandinho is going to play as a central defender, without him in midfield, the pressing is not as good. Plus, he's 35 now, so you assume he can't play at that kind of intensity every 3.5 days, which is going to be for everybody this season. So I think there's still major questions there. And I think there's even a question about them going forward, that we're assuming Aguero will come back from his knee injury and be the Aguero he has always been. He's been the most consistent source of goals that they've had. But he is 32. Players can take time to get back after knee surgery. They can never quite get it back, particularly when they're that age. And Gabriel Jesus, for all his qualities in terms of his movement, in terms of his pressing, is not an absolute A+ finisher. So I think this concerns also three bands of a team there. While acknowledging they're still a brilliant team, and I think they will be better than last season, I think there's still sufficient doubt there to think they might not be getting back to that sort of 95-point mark, which last 3 seasons you've needed to win the title.
Martin, that's the possible deficiencies of City as an odds-on favourite. Is there anything about Liverpool that suggested last season was a one-off? I'm not going to use the word fluke, but given the odds of 9-4, that would suggest that people out there, the bookies, the punters, don't see them repeating the trick.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people that would say that for their points tally, Liverpool weren't that remarkable in terms of their performances. A lot of it was down to their their mentality and stuff like that. There was a lot of arguments that they were actually better the season before, and I sort of buy into that a little bit. I think obviously you can look at the way they ended the season. They'd already won the league, obviously, so they obviously took the foot off the gas a bit. But even the defeat to Watford before that, when they were under pressure to keep up that sort of unbeaten run, they did have a wobble, and obviously in the Champions League as well. So they didn't end the season strongly, and it is difficult to make a case that they will push for the same sort of points haul, which is why I think Man City will, like Jonathan says, bridge that gap. Whether they do it enough to sort of overtake them, I agree, is going to be very difficult. But I think for Liverpool, a lot of it rides on Thiago. I think if they sign Thiago, then there weren't many players that could improve that starting 11, and Thiago is one of those. So if Liverpool could get that many points and then go on to improve not their squad but their starting 11, then I think for me they would still be considered favourites.
Liverpool 9-4 with a host of bookies. Man City 5-6 with Betway is the best price. Jonathan, just a word from you on Liverpool as well. Would you agree with Martin's assessment there? Whilst they blitzed the league, I mean, I think there's a stat around about how many 1-0 wins they had, wins by single goal margins, which, in terms of variance could translate into a few draws next season. Is there any issue here? I mean, I can hear the Liverpool fans listening to this shouting at me saying it's absolute nonsense what I'm saying. Is it nonsense?
Look, I think there's 1-0 wins and 1-0 wins, and a lot of Liverpool's 1-goal victories were very, very comfortable 1-goal victories. So I thought that the way they played sort of through late autumn, early winter last season was genuinely exceptional. I thought the way they took Leicester apart, was it 4-1 that game at the King Power, was that Boxing Day? Around Christmas time anyway, was an absolute what's the word I'm looking for? A signature performance. That was the great performance of that season, and a performance that summed up everything that they were good at. My concern would be trends that I think post sort of really from the beginning of this year, although they had that run of victories through January and February, their form, they weren't playing as well as they had done. I think the whole sort of going off to the Club World Cup and coming back, although they managed that well in the short term, the break that they got with the winter break and then not playing a first team in the FA Cup, they sort of seemed to lose a bit of momentum then and never quite regained it. For all that they did then, I can't remember how many straight wins it was in the league, but those performances weren't as impressive. And then even before lockdown, there'd been that stutter. The Watford game, the Atletico Madrid game, the defeat in the cup to Chelsea. That is right, isn't it? It was Chelsea who lost in the cup. Yeah. Sorry. So even before that, the defeat to Watford in the league, the defeat to Atletico in the Champions League, the defeat to Chelsea in the cup, and so the last 15 games last season, they only won 7. They weren't that impressive against Arsenal in the Community Shield. After a very strange
glorified friendly, yeah.
Well, always a glorified friendly, but this season more than any other season. You're coming 6 days after Champions League final, and yet somehow so it was closer to the previous season's Champions League final than the start of this year's Premier League season. So that game, Community Shields are only ever signposts to anything when it immediately goes terribly wrong for manager, and you have been able to see some of that in the Community Shield. Now, I'm not saying we've seen that with Klopp at all, but the fact that they weren't still quite their best, you do wonder if they can pick up that rhythm straight away, and also the intensity with which they play. Will this sort of compressed season, presumably they'll make huge compromises in the League Cup and the FA Cup. They won't play anything like a first team then, but still, you just worry. Can they pick up that form of sort of December, and B, can they maintain that when the games come so frequently? And I also think they're moving, not quite yet, but they're moving into territory where the age profile of a squad becomes an issue. That all three first choice forwards are 28.
Mm-hmm.
That's clearly fine for this season. It's probably fine for next season. But at some point, there's going to come a need to begin to integrate the likes of Minamino or new signings. And if you're picking something that's nowhere near a first choice 11 in the League Cup and the FA Cup, that becomes increasingly difficult to do. So I do think that there is a danger, and it probably doesn't come quite yet, that this Liverpool team faces that huge problem of all reaching reaching the edge of a cliff together. But that's probably not quite there yet.
So looking down the list then, in the title winner, we've got Chelsea next up at 11-1. But unsurprisingly, a lot of support for them given the transfer dealings over the past kind of month or so. Manchester United were getting a lot of attention at the back end of last season. They're now 16-1. Arsenal 40-1. Spurs 66-1. We'll come on to them later, unless either of you want to make a case for why either of them are going to win the league or challenge for the league this season. But starting with Chelsea and United, Martin, coming to you first. Do you see those two sides as genuine title challengers or just the best of the rest?
I think it's so hard to tell. I just think, especially at the start of this season with the schedule, how the sort of pre-season has panned out, it's going to be difficult for any team to be at their best until maybe the end of this month. So I think that may well play into Chelsea's hands, where they've got a lot of players to bed in, and you might say, they need time to gel. I don't think any of their competitors are going to be at full strength either. So I think that plays into their hands potentially quite nicely. And it is difficult not to get excited about Chelsea, even as a neutral. Even for the goals they'll probably still concede, they're going to be amazing to watch. I can't remember a more exciting transfer window, and I'm not even a Chelsea fan. I'm like a little bit giddy about it.
What about Villa's transfer dealings last summer, Martin? Third most money spent in Europe.
Yeah, I don't really want to touch on that. But yeah, I think the Verna signing was massive, and then to add, well, they'd already added Ziyech before that, of course, but to add Havertz, to have Pulisic when he comes back from injury, it's just going to be frightening, that attack. So yeah, it's difficult not to get excited about them and to see some sort of value in them, just because, like I said, I do think the start of the season will be a bit mixed for quite a lot of teams. I think you might see quite a few draws where you wouldn't normally for the big sides. So Chelsea, I can see value in. Manchester United obviously ended the season very, very strongly, and there's obviously the stat since Bruno arrived, they got the most points
and penalties.
And penalties quite crucially. I think I'm still not sure they can sustain that level. Like you say, the penalties is it seems like just an unnecessary dig, but it was a quite remarkable amount of penalties that they won. And that's a tactic in a way. They to be good at winning penalties, there's nothing wrong with that. But to carry that on over an entire season will be difficult. So I think it's more difficult to see them. And I think the obviously the incident with Harry Maguire won't help leading up to the season in terms of their sort of defensive preparations. And obviously they're keen to add a couple of players. I think they're keen to add a defender, if not one centre back, then maybe a left back as well. And obviously the Sancho debacle, which is great fun. So yeah, a lot of it, like with Liverpool and Thiago, a lot of it changes. I think if Sancho arrives, then they obviously become a much more potent attack, because that right side is very unbalanced. Even with Mason Greenwood, who's been obviously exceptional, I think it's a lot of pressure on him to expect him to keep up that level of efficiency in the final third for an 18-year-old who is naturally a striker. They're basically playing three central strikers and getting the best out of them. But where that then goes on to affect the midfield is an issue. So yeah, I think arguably still their most important player this season will be Nemanja Matic as things stand. So, and I'm not sure he's a top level. Like there are games where he's outstanding, and there are games where it just looks like he can't move.
Yeah.
And he's so casual, so languid on the ball. There are times when I'm just like, you can overrun him so easily. So I think there's a weakness there in their midfield.
I think crucially, when you say important there, you mean, his position, the role he's going to play is most
Yeah,
important. Not that
not that he'll be the best player, the standout performer or anything, but he is very impactful on their results, and obviously his form will be very important if they don't sign a replacement, and if Scott McTominay doesn't turn into a world beater.
I'm Team Fred still, but enough of that for another day. I think what you're saying is right. For United to be challenging right at the very top, we're asking them not only to kind of sustain the unsustainable, both in terms of penalties and in terms of the finishing ability of their strikers, mainly Mason Greenwood, who seems to basically stick every shot into the side netting, which not many people can do that. So. And then also make up about 30 points on Liverpool too. With Chelsea, I guess it's a whole new team. But we'll quickly touch the top four market because there used to be a top four, then there was a big six, and now it kind of feels like there's a top four again with City 1 to 25, Liverpool 1 to 12 best price, Manchester United 1 to 2, Chelsea 8 to 15. Before you get to Arsenal, who are 3 to 1. In the without Manchester City and Liverpool market, so basically who wins the league if you take those two out. You've got Manchester United at 9 to 5, Chelsea at 2 to 1. So pretty much picking prices between the two, 10 to 1 bar. Jonathan, it's easy for us to kind of look through the teams on paper of both United and Chelsea, and their clear qualities are obvious. It's not as easy to look in the dugout and say the same thing. I mean, how much of a bearing is that going to have on the campaigns for those two sides?
Well, it's huge. I mean, I think the big question over Lampard is defensive transition, that they conceded more goals to fast breaks last season than any other side in the Premier League, which is an extraordinary statistic given how many goals some of the other teams conceded. And I think in terms of cross set plays, the corners or wide free kicks, there's only Norwich and Villa conceded more, which again, given they're conceding 60% more goals than Chelsea, is a remarkable stat. And it was the same for Lampard at Derby, that his Derby side conceded a high proportion of goals to fast breaks than any other team in the Championship that season. So that's a massive issue. Now, you would think that signing somebody like, both Verna and Havertz are used to playing, you have a classic Bundesliga counter-pressing game. That should help, but they still need direction. So the red flag that's been waving from the start for me about Lampard as a manager is those two things: counter-pressing, defensive transition, and also defending cross-set plays. They're both, the way you get good at them is detailed training ground work. And if you're failing on both of those, maybe it's personnel. That can happen. Yeah. If you've got a squad who can't defend, you've got a squad who can't defend. And you do look at the centre-backs they had last season, and you say, there's none of them are sort of really authoritative. And that point Lampard made after the defeat at West Ham, saying he didn't have tall enough players, there's a bit of mockery of that because you can compare heights, and his team is not particularly short. But there is sort of like a moral height that defenders have, that a 6'2" centre-back can appear 6'6" because of his presence, because of his timing of jumps, because of the way he projects himself. And you would look at people like Rudiger and Christensen, Tomori, and you would say, they probably don't quite have that. Now, obviously, bringing in Thiago Silva will absolutely help that, with the caveat that he's 35, that there is a worrying history of people coming to the Premier League in their mid-30s or over the age of 30 for the first time and never quite adapting to the specific demands of the Premier League. Presumably, he's not going to be able to play every game. You would think there will be issues of pace that he may struggle with. But he does have those leadership qualities that maybe they lack at the back. Malang Sarr, obviously much younger player, highly promising. And so you can see kind of getting the two together, it sort of makes sense of somebody for the here and now and somebody who hopefully will develop into that. I think Chelsea are hugely exciting next season. I think they'll be great to watch, but I'm not quite sure they've solved the problems that really undermine them next season. That the goals they will add may win them 2 or 3 more games, but the issues are really at the other end. And it's the problem when it's not working in defensive transition is it's very hard to pinpoint at which point in the team the issue comes. There's something to do with the overall structure. And it may even be as simple as N'Golo Kante having his poorest season since he came to England. And of course, he had all those issues in France with the various legal battles last season. You never quite know what bearing that has. They're still not resolved. So there are problems there, and Kepa, of course, remains a problem. That no team's ever won the championship with a hologram in goal.
I was going to say he's a massive problem, but I think using the word massive and Kepa doesn't really align.
Well, but one thing I would say about that as well is I think he conceded 45% of all shots on target last season. I think that's the stat, which is the worst stat of any keeper since that stat started to be collected. But the question I'd have is, why was it so much lower last season than ever before? And you look at Willy Caballero, the games he played last season, and he also suffered sort of a 15-point drop-off. So that suggests it's not actually just an issue of confidence or ability or form with the keeper. That there's something in the way Chelsea play that exposes keepers to shots that are likely to go in.
Higher probability shots.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't think it's as simple as just saying, oh, get rid of Kepa, get in somebody better, and that issue suddenly resolved. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that.
And I guess, you mentioned the fast breaks. It does feel like Frank Lampard's Chelsea and the Derby team he had as well, basically press for pressing's sake. That is drilled into them rather than being a particularly, an idea of how to win the ball back and then defend and sit deeper. So if you are conceding loads of chances on the break, naturally they're going to be high probability chances. I'm not going to mention XG because people get upset, but that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, and then Solskjaer. I'll be much brief about Solskjaer, but look, he's okay as a coach. He's fine. United, when they play against good sides, sit deep and play on the break, they're fine at that. They've got great pace going forward, but that's kind of, you'd expect the manager to be able to do that. That's nothing kind of particularly dramatic or exciting. The issue, I think, is in structured attacking. And you really saw that against Sevilla in the Europa League semi-final. Thought that they kept, they had loads of possession, but they didn't seem to have that cohesiveness, that fluency that the very best teams have, and that would be a worry for me. And I think also you saw by the time you got to the very end of the season, the FA Cup semi-final, and then into the Europa League, they just looked exhausted. He'd had the same first 11 playing constantly for, post shutdown. And to an extent, okay, it was a gamble he took. This is my first choice 11. I can trust them. We'll keep going, and we'll get enough points to get in the top 4, which was the target. And he achieved that. So to an extent, the gamble worked. You can't do that over a season. Now, bringing in Van der Beek obviously gives them a load of more. He's so versatile. He can play anywhere in midfield. So it means they're not going to have to keep playing those same 3 midfielders. But when they first started going after Sancho, so why do they need Sancho? That's surely not the priority. Obviously, anybody wants Sancho, but but that didn't seem an obvious weakness in the team. But then you think about it and you think, actually, they've only really got 3 forwards he can trust.
Yeah.
And
he can play the left or the right.
And he can play either side. He'd probably play through the middle if you really wanted him to. But as Martin said, they've got 3 centre forwards there anyway, so you wouldn't need to do that. So they probably do need another forward just to rotate a bit. And then I think they need another centre back and another left back. So, and there's De Gea's form, which he played very well against Germany on whichever night that was. But there's still a question mark over his form. So I can't see them mounting a serious challenge. Whether they can put together enough good results to sort of take third and win the title without City and Liverpool, maybe, but I wouldn't be confident.
Well, that opens up some interesting markets here then, because Martin, you've just heard Jonathan there kind of pour cold water maybe on the hopes of United and Chelsea in terms of a title challenge. But then, as I mentioned, in the top 4 market, you've got Arsenal 3-1. That's with Hills. Tottenham 7-2 with Hills. Wolves 13-2. Leicester 10-1. Everton 20-1. Leeds 25-1. I'm not going to go down further than that at the moment, unless there's anyone you want to flag, unless it's Aston Villa. But who do we see as being not only the best of the rest, but maybe somebody who can gate crash that top 4?
It doesn't pain me to say it, but I'd fancy Tottenham personally. Not because they showed great progression under Mourinho or anything like that. I think they've been very, very smart in the transfer window to now. I think Højbjerg and Matt Doherty are both really sensible signings, which is probably not what Tottenham have looked to do in recent windows. And I think they improved the team a fair deal. So I think those will strengthen them, and I just think obviously so much of their issues began and ended with Harry Kane being injured last season, and that obviously is a sort of annual thing. So they still need that stand-in, and that's their sort of their problem every transfer window is finding a good enough player who's happy to be a second choice striker, and it's not an easy thing to do, but I think there are options out there, and if they can pick up someone, even someone like Mario Mandzukic, I think would be a really smart signing for Tottenham. He's a free agent now. But if they get that, if they can find another striker that can stand in for Harry Kane's sort of perennial injury issues, then they're a good case. Arsenal, it's tough. They've obviously put in some good performances, and I would say have improved under Arteta now. I think that was hard to say. I think George, obviously you had an opinion on that a while back, but I think that was hard to say at the time that he was getting his message across necessarily, but I think we are seeing that slightly more now. So they're a good case. I think Leicester, you started to see perhaps not their natural level, because they're better than they were performing at the end of last season, but they were sort of meeting towards that sort of natural level. I don't think they're a top four side personally.
It's pretty stark that they are, though. They're 10-1 for top four, and they looked a lock for top four basically throughout the whole season until the wheels really fell off. Is that a bit of an overreaction?
It could be, yeah. It could be, because, like I said, Arsenal and Tottenham, you can't rely on them. I do think, like you said, it has become more of a top four again now. So it is difficult to make a case for one of those other sides to break in. My lean at the moment would just be towards Tottenham narrowly, I think.
Jonathan, same question to you. Who do you think is best set to crash the party?
Well, I think Arteta's done a remarkable job, and I think Arsenal are playing with more sort of purpose and more cohesiveness than they have done. I mean, for I don't know, 7 or 8 years probably. But there's questions about squad depth, and I think there's huge questions about just other things going on at the club, which just seems a mess, and so many worrying factors there. But on the pitch, they look great, and the fact that they've suddenly started getting results against big teams, which was what they weren't doing. So I think it's entirely possible they could get in the top four. But you said 3-1 for Arsenal, didn't you?
Yeah.
I mean, that just feels a bit short, particularly if Tottenham are 7-2.
Yeah.
It sort of feels like a 50-50 call to me between Arsenal and Tottenham. If Tottenham are longer, well, obviously back them. Leicester, I think, is a really interesting thing, because I sort of feel it's a classic problem you sometimes get of sort of time frame. Over what time frame do we judge a team? So why does it matter Leicester picked up so many points in the first half of last season, so few in the second half of last season? Yeah, the start of last season, the aim would have been get into Europe and improve on the previous season. Well, they did both of those things, and that therefore makes it a successful season. But there's such a sense of anticlimax because of the way they tailed off. And you sort of think, is that tailing off? Is it regression to the mean? Is it something more serious than that? Is it the squad being found out? I mean, you think of things like the game when they lost to Tottenham, lost 3-0 to Tottenham, and basically it's because they end up having to play Wes Morgan at centre back because Soyuncu was suspended. I think they had one other player was injured, so Wes Morgan comes in, and they still play a high line. And guess what? If you pop the ball in behind Wes Morgan, he can't turn fast enough to catch Harry Kane or Son Heung-min.
Yeah.
So, is that sort of decline towards the end of the season? Is that just because the squad is fairly sort of slender? Is it because players have lost faith in Rodgers? And it's I just don't know about that, and I never quite know whether these sort of shifts of momentum we should take seriously, or whether we should sort of say, look, the season as a whole, they achieved their objectives. I mean, clearly, if they start off as they did last season, then 10-1 is going to look a very good price for them to get top four. But it sort of feels like they're a top 6, top 7 side. Wolves, I think, are the interesting one. Just because they were so good at times last season, and in the end, I think just sort of ran out of steam because their squad's not huge, but they're not going to have the Europa League this season. Their league season this season will take less than a year, which is going to be a great boost for them. And so having no European football, you sort of think, well, they should be able to improve on their league form by 5 or 10 points. And so at what price were Wolves to get in the top four?
13-2.
13-2, okay. But still, that I think is mildly attractive.
Might attract to 13-2. So kind of making cases, I guess, for Arsenal and Wolves. But I think what we're saying maybe is the market's got it just about right, maybe there. There is also, I'll just mention the prices as well, either without Man City or Liverpool market, with United 9-5, Chelsea 2-1, Arsenal and Spurs both 10-1, Wolves 22-1, Leicester 33-1. So you can see there that the prices get pretty big pretty quickly. So if you do fancy Arsenal to really make a fist of it, or Tottenham, as Martin said, 10-1 to beat both United and Chelsea could be the way to go. And before we kind of tackle the bottom end of the table, we'll run through a few of the clubs who are just below that chasing pack. We can look mainly, I guess, at the top 6 market here. On the basis of what you just said there, Jonathan, I guess the 5-2 about Wolves top 6 could appeal more than the 13-2 about top 4.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's kind of 5-2 on can they finish ahead of Leicester, where you'd really hope they could. And then they also have a chance of finishing ahead of some other teams if they have disappointing seasons. So, yeah. 5-2 on Wolves to finish in the top 6, I think feels quite attractive to me.
The group below, we've got Everton, who are 5-1 for a top 6 finish, or 20-1 for a top 4 finish. Carlo Ancelotti bringing in his, he normally comes into clubs with high reputation, older players. He didn't at Everton, so he's decided to bring him in himself in Allen. And James Rodriguez seemingly going to be announced fairly soon as well. I think a lot of Everton fans are pretty excited about what's going on there. Leeds are 14-1, top 6. And I think 33-1, 25-1, top 4. Going to be really interesting to see Marcelo Bielsa's Leeds this coming season. I do think, despite the cult of Bielsa and the all the talk about him, I do kind of think they're a little bit undervalued in the market still. I mean, they were over the course of 2 years the best. I covered the Championship a fair amount, and they're the best team we've seen in the Championship by far over those 2 years. And you look at what Sheffield United did last season, coming up, playing that similar kind of very on-brand style of football. There could be something to do there, but I'll ask you about them in a second. And then Southampton are also 14-1 to finish in the top 6 and are 35-1 in the top 4. Martin, come to you first out of those 3. Take your pick. Everton, Leeds, Saints. Who do you want to talk about?
Let's go for Leeds, I guess. I think I agree with you. It feels a bit like Wolves to me. When they came up, Wolves were so comfortably the best team in the Championship when they came up. And I think that's kind of the case with Leeds, like you say, over the last 2 seasons. I think this season a lot of people would make a case for Brentford being close to them, but obviously they didn't have the sort of mental strength to make it over the line. And I wouldn't have fancied them in the Premier League to push as high as Leeds, just because they're so drilled, they're so intense, and I think that will be a shock to some of the teams in the Premier League. Not a shock because they know that's going to happen, but just actually dealing with it, actually coping with that. Leeds are a quite unique side in that sense, and it's strange to say because Wolves, you looked at them and they came up and they had big players like Ruben Neves and players like that who were like, how is he in the Championship? Leeds don't really have that. They're just an incredibly well-coached team. If you look at their squad, if you put a different manager to that team, you'd be like, no, they're going straight back down. I think you'd be safe to say that. I think you're looking at sort of, I know Pablo Hernandez is an absolute hero at Leeds, but what he did at Swansea and his age and stuff like that, relying on him under another coach and players like that would be almost crazy. But with Bielsa, it's just a marriage made in heaven. That team and that coach at the moment, and they are certainly one to watch. I can't say that I've watched enough of them this season to know how they progressed from the previous season when Aston Villa were in the Championship, and I saw a lot more of them. So I don't would be the man to talk about how they might have changed this season. But I know that obviously they were still very, very strong. So yeah, they do feel a bit like Wolves in the sense that they're a cut above. Unlike other sort of promoted teams have been in the last since in the Premier League era, I'd say Wolves and Leeds just look like that class act that will adapt to the Premier League quite seamlessly, and Wolves obviously did. So I do like the look of Leeds, but I do think again some of their signings a decent amount of money on Rodrigo, who's not a goal scorer. Patrick Bamford is obviously not a great finisher of chances.
Of easy chances. He's a good finisher of hard chances.
Of easy chances, yeah. So I know a lot of people are saying Rodrigo's one of those a team forward, and he'll link the play, and that he'll be an important player in that sense. And maybe Bamford was that to an extent last season, but I still think they could have got more for their money in that regard. And obviously they've got money. They are improving their squad. I think Ben White will be a big blow, and how Robin Koch sort of fills that void will be important. Whether he can sort of step up straight away, and for any new player coming into a Bielsa side is going to be a shock to the system. So there's probably more of the sort of factor of how easily and how quickly they can sort of integrate into the side. But he's not had any problems in the past, so I'm not going to question Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds. But yeah, that would be my angle, I guess.
Leeds also 9-4 to finish in the top half, which might be the way to go if you want to get behind Leeds. Jonathan, I'll say the same to you. You can give your tuppence on Leeds to us as well, but also Everton and Saints.
Yeah, I mean, Everton. If I were an Everton fan, I'd be massively excited at the minute. You could see what Ancelotti was doing. Second half of last season, that very narrow, quite sterile midfield four, and you sort of looked at that and thought that's not really an Ancelotti way of playing, to be quite so dull through midfield. But I think it's probably a case of that's what he had available. And the two big signings he's made, and the one who appears to be about to make, to bring in Doucouré and Allen and James, that suddenly gives far greater dynamism to that midfield. James, it's one of those. The Golden Boot winner in 2014 scored a brilliant goal against Uruguay, the most sort of exciting player of his generation. And then he spent 6 years with it not quite working out for him, partly because of injuries, partly because of coaches who didn't have faith in him. But Ancelotti is the coach who has got the best out of him. His best season was 14-15 at Real Madrid. He got 13 goals, 13 assists. His best season after that was his first season at Bayern, when Ancelotti was sacked in September. So it's only sort of 6 weeks or so he played under him there. But still, Ancelotti has got the best out of him. So all of that is hugely exciting. And for Everton, a team who, an upper mid-table Premier League team, with obviously huge potential and new stadium and everything, but that's where they are at the minute. For them to get a player of that stature at the age of 29 is massively exciting. However, it's also massively expensive. Even though his transfer fee is only about 20 million, his wages will be huge. Now, Everton are the 19th wealthiest team in the world by revenue. If you look at the 20 richest teams in the world, they have the highest wages to turnover ratio. It's 85%. But no other team in the top 20 are in the 80s. There's only 3 others have more than 66%. So that 85%, and that's before Allen, who's 29 and on high wages, and James and Doucouré.
Jesus.
That is a huge warning sign. And so you sort of think, what's the plan here? What's the end game of this? Are they gambling on getting Champions League football? Is that why they think they're going to make this back? Or is there going to be a massive retrenchment next summer if they don't get there? Because that's really, 85% is really dangerous. And if there's no fans as well, then that turnover, the revenue is going to drop. So that's becoming an even higher percentage of turnover. So excitement, but this is a big gamble. And it's partly the way Everton have gone about things is they keep signing players from big clubs. So they don't go and sign the 22-year-old promising player from Augsburg
with a high resale value.
So Luca Dean has been great for them and is a really good fullback, but they get him from Barcelona, so his wages are high. Moise Kean, clearly enormously talented, although it didn't really work for him last season, but they've signed him from Juventus. Yerry Mina, but even people like Walcott or Iwobi, they're signing them. It's certainly in Walcott's case on the way down from a big club. In Iwobi's case, you wonder how much more development he's got. So that's my huge concern about it. It's not really on the playing side; it's on the financial side, and I think they pretty rapidly have to start scouting people in their late teens and kind of making a bit of profit on that.
So word of warning there from Jonathan, but also a time of excitement for Everton. We're going to have to move on now, so sorry to Saints fans, but you are 13-8 to finish in the top half. West Ham are 3-1, Sheffield United 130, Brighton 7-2. Stop me if any of those catch your fancy, both of you. But otherwise, we'll move on to the relegation market. And so I guess if we haven't spoken about your team so far, you can cross your fingers that we don't speak about them now. West Brom are 11-10 joint favourites with Fulham. Aston Villa 2-1, Newcastle 9-4 alongside Crystal Palace, who are also 9-4. Burnley 3-1, Sheffield United, Brighton and Leeds all 4-1. West Ham 9-2, Southampton 9-1. And then we're getting into the 20s, 25-1 Everton, 40-1 Leicester. Martin, start with the top two. West Brom and Fulham, two promoted sides from last season from the Championship. Fulham seem to have learnt from their last stay in the Premier League by not completely buying a whole new team from around the world for 100-odd million quid. And West Brom have managed to keep Grady Diangana, which has been a transfer that has got a lot more press than a usual transfer between West Ham and West Brom has done due to the reaction from Mark Noble and Jack Wilshere. I mean, what do we make of their chances of staying up this season?
I think West Brom, the fact that their level price with Fulham is perhaps a bit misleading. They were obviously over the course of the season they were a considerably better side than Fulham, I'd say. Fulham, like they did when they came up, they ended the season pretty well, and I think you have to sort of admire and you have to like Scott Parker really and the job that he's done, and obviously he made a lot of what was a rebuilding of the sort of mentality within the squad rather than sort of coaching. There was a big issue in terms of they were just a losing side and he had to turn that around. So if he has done that, we'll see in the Premier League at least. But yeah, their squad is underwhelming, I would say, at this level, relatively imbalanced. I think you're looking at players like they'll probably go out and buy a decent centre back or whatever, but if you're looking at players like Tim Ream and players like that, Michael Hector, who are very solid Championship players, like very decent defenders, but then obviously Ream in the Premier League got found out massively. I think a lot of their players were found out quite badly in that season and didn't make the step up. Obviously they did make a lot of signings that year, and I think the sort of transition this year will be kinder to them. Like I say, I think the point where the start of this season will be a bit of a strange one. I think we'll probably potentially play into the favour of the promoted sides in terms of not getting left behind early on. I think they'll pick up points, but I think West Brom are the better side and keeping hold of Diangana, and obviously Mateus Pereira is a very, very good player.
Yeah.
Easily a top half Premier League player, I'd say. So getting him for the money that they did, obviously that was already agreed in his loan, but that's obviously a great signing. That was always going to happen, but it did drag on a little bit. But they do have exciting players in attack. It's just leading that attack. They do not have exciting players as things stand. He's still got, is it Charlie Austin?
Charlie Austin, Harrison Kanu and Kenneth Sahor. Although there is talk that Carlin Grant could be on his way. Yeah,
Carlin Grant would be a decent signing. Obviously, they've been talked about Troy Deeney as well, and maybe they do need that sort of that experienced head through the middle, where obviously you've got Pereira and Diangana in support, and they don't have Premier League experience per se. Obviously, Diangana has a little bit, but not a great deal. The signing of a striker for that team will be crucial, I think, for them to have any chance. Because they'll be solid enough. They had a decent defensive record last season. I think they can maintain that. They're sort of experienced, sort of midfield base and players that they have should help. Whereas Fulham, I just think you're relying on players that have proven to be good Championship players and have proven to fail at Premier League level. Obviously, Knockart, players like that. Tom Kearney, excellent Championship player, didn't make the step up well enough.
I can hear the Fulham fans saying, like, Last time we were here, we tried to buy Premier League quality players, and now we're being panned for sticking with our Championship lads. Like, what are we meant to do?
I just think I'm not saying that they can't stay up. They definitely can. They're not. They're not. I don't think they're a team that are cut adrift massively. But they would be my sort of favourites for relegation, as it were, ahead of West Brom, given that they're the same price, and then you come on to Villa after that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Jonathan, we'll ignore Villa because they're Martin's team, and naturally, I think we can trust him not to be overly biased, and he's closer to what's going on there than we are. So we'll come back to you on that. But you've got a clutch of teams behind them. With Newcastle, who are 9-4, who haven't done much business yet, but it seems likely they're going to be signing Callum Wilson, Jamal Lewis, and Ryan Fraser, which all seem like pretty good signings. And they obviously had a really good spell under Steve Bruce after the COVID break, where they looked like a completely different team. That kind of low block was gone, and they played some really decent stuff. Crystal Palace are 9-4 as well, who've managed to keep hold of Wilfried Zaha. They brought in Ebere Eze from QPR, who's a player that I absolutely adore, and I can't wait to see him playing in the Premier League. Burnley are at 3-1. The same old people will tip Burnley to go down every year. The same old people will probably end up looking silly, but in the hands of Sean Dyche. So, and then Sheffield United at 4-1, Brighton at 4-1. And Leeds at 4-1. Sheffield United had a brilliant season last season, and they look like they're going to be adding a few decent additions in the coming days. Brighton 4-1 will, I'm sure, appeal to many. Which of those groups do you think look the most vulnerable?
Well, okay. Leeds, I think, are fascinating because there's no other team in the division where the parameters are so wide. Yeah, it's totally conceivable they could finish 5th.
Yeah.
I mean, just about conceivable they could finish 5th. It's also conceivable things go massively wrong really early. Bielsa walks out in a strop and thing falls apart and they finish bottom 20 points adrift. Those two things are both possible. I suspect they'll be around about 10th, as in halfway in between those. So Leeds at 4-1 is not quite long enough to tempt me. I think Bielsa's settled enough that the sort of you're not going to get the combustion we've seen from him before. I think West Ham
9-2.
9-2. Yeah, I mean that seems quite generous to me. I am not convinced at all by David Moyes as a manager in the modern game. I remember towards the end of last season, I wrote a piece. So this might have changed in the last 2 games last season. I do offer this with that caveat. But there was not a single time he changed the game positively with a substitution, with his first substitution, sorry. So, yeah, if they were drawing when he made his first substitution, they would either draw or lose. He never turned a draw into a win. And frequently wins turned into draws or turned into defeats. So, and we saw that at Sunderland as well, that his substitutions made very, very little positive difference. They sort of feel there's a tension there, right? There's Moyes is kind of good at the old-fashioned values of, keeping it fairly solid, working on set plays, which is that's a fine way to play if your ambitions are sort of staying up lower mid-table. And that's what I think Steve Bruce is good at Newcastle. I think Newcastle almost certainly will be fine. And I think they're probably better last season credit for. And even their own fans, I think, for various totally understandable reasons about the dissatisfaction with Mike Ashley, are inclined to look on the negative side. But there's a tension there at West Ham that I think they had the 8th highest wage bill last season. And they clearly see themselves, and with the London Stadium, they should see themselves as being a team that should be at least Europa League challenging. And so they signed people like Sebastian Haller, who had proved himself a very good player in Germany. But then they don't really play him in the same way. They don't get players to support him. And then there's this frustration, this sort of, £40 million waste. And you just haven't really used him right. And then the people like Felipe Anderson, who it's a bit of the same as the Everton problem of signing players above your grade with the expectation of, or the hope of, the aspiration of sort of lifting your club to meet their level. But then when things don't go right, that type of player immediately sort of like, what am I doing here? And they start to look for the exit. That's not me to blame them. I completely understand why you would do that. And if you then appointed David Moyes as the manager, somebody like Felipe Anderson presumably looks at David Moyes and thinks, I don't really. This isn't the football I dreamed of playing at the peak of my career. No. So I think that tension makes them very, very vulnerable, and they need to work out which of the two they are. So yeah, and they've got a very, very difficult start.
Yeah, they do.
Things could go badly wrong for West Ham pretty quickly, and then what does Moyes get sacked in October if they're sort of bottom 3, bottom 4? And then you got a whole new start. So I think 9-2 West Ham are worth backing. But I mean, I think West Brom and Fulham. If Fulham, to answer your question about what are they meant to do, are they meant to stick with the same players, or are they meant to sign stars? They're meant to have not signed the stars last time, because what you've got, and as a Sunderland fan, I really, really understand this. You've got a load of players who are actually good enough to be lower half Premier League players, who are carrying this mental baggage of what happened to them last time. And that means that when things start to go wrong, it doesn't matter how mentally tough you are, or how good a player, how professional you are, you've got that nagging away in the back of your mind of, oh God, it's happening again. And you start to doubt yourself. It's bound to happen. So if Fulham get off to a poor start, there's a whole load of players who've been there before who didn't get out of it before, and there's no reason to think they'll be able to do it any differently this time. In fact, there's less reason to think they'll be able to do it differently this time.
So concerns for Fulham there.
I would say, and West Brom, just to touch on that, I think defensively they'll be fine. It's an issue of have they got enough firepower to get goals.
Yeah, well, hopefully West Brom fans hoping they do add a striker fairly soon, because that role, that position, Harry Robson kind of did a good job there last season, but not a goal scorer. And Charlie Austin, I don't think these days is the person you want to be relying on for goals in the Premier League. Martin, come to you now quickly on Villa. We're approaching the hour mark, so we're going to have to rattle through these last ones pretty quickly. But how are you feeling? You're 2-1 for relegation. Does that seem fair to you?
It does seem a fair price at the moment, you'd have to say, just based on the fact that there's been so little transfer activity. I think Villa are one of those clubs where it could change massively between now and the end of the transfer window. There's talk of there being the sort of budget to spend the same amount that they did last time, over £100 million, and they desperately need attacking reinforcements, and they haven't made that yet. And I think what they did last summer, although they spent a lot of money, what they did, they got players in very, very early to try and bed them in, and it is becoming increasingly worrying, the fact that there's been so few through the door at this time. I think the fact that Villa have got that sort of blank on the first game week is turning into a godsend now, and maybe that's playing into their sort of thinking a little bit in terms of not wanting to rush transfers. But to have not added to not have a striker, Wesley's still not fit. Ali Samatta is not a Premier League striker. We saw that. Keenan Davies is not a Premier League striker. Might be good enough as a sort of stand-in to come off the bench. But I think perhaps even more worrying is you've got Anwar El Ghazi and Trezeguet competing on that right flank, and they're both incredibly inconsistent. And you're relying on one of them to be in form at any one time, and the other one to be the one that's struggling. But last season, a lot of the time, they were both struggling. So the links to Ollie Watkins make a huge amount of sense, in the sense that he can play wide and he can play through the middle, and Dean Smith signed him. But the fact that hasn't happened yet is getting quite worrying. I think Villa fans were expecting Brentford to sign Ivan Toney, and then Watkins gets done.
It sounds like he might have an option to be Harry Kane's understudy.
Yeah, and Brentford have reportedly upped their asking price post signing Ivan Toney, which I think for Villa it's baffled them a little bit. And I think the fact that it's become known that they have a lot of transfer budget is hindering them in the market. And I know they're trying to be quite secretive about their signings this summer under the new sporting director Johan Lange. But it's very, very quiet, and that is a concern. And yeah, it's tough to make a case for Villa to stay up as things stand. I think Matty Cash is a decent addition. I think he's possibly the best right back in the Championship last season, in what was his first season at right back. So I think he's a decent addition, but he's not what Villa needed necessarily. So yeah, the lack of attacking reinforcements and the whole Jack Grealish thing, I can't see him leaving now, but how he plays, how his mentality is at this point, having kept Villa up and ultimately stopped himself from leaving the club when I think it's pretty obvious he did want to leave. How he comes into this season and whether he can go again with all the England stuff and all that, whether whether he can play for Villa and get in the England team is difficult. So a lot of seems so obvious, but a lot relies on Jack Grealish. So yeah,
I feel like me and you should have a chat after this and just launch our own Jack Grealish podcast, and we can just every week we can just talk about Jack and what's going on in England at Villa.
I think the price at the moment is fair because of the transfer inactivity, so to speak. But like I said, it's something that could change massively for Villa. I think what's holding them back is their wage structure, but that is another discussion for another time.
Before we move on to the last two markets, I'm just going to make a quick case for a club that I really like in Brighton at 4-1. I really like Graham Potter as a manager. I think he's a great coach, and I think he's an exciting manager who'll go on to bigger things with or without Brighton in the future. But a 4-1 alongside Sheffield United and Leeds, a bigger price than Burnley. It looked for quite a long time last season like they would be getting relegated. They haven't made many additions on top of last season, really. Adam Lallana comes in. He's going to be playing, as I mentioned a couple of months ago. I'd like to have a market where Adam Lallana to make the most passes in the Premier League next season, because he's just going to be standing in the centre circle, popping the ball around. But it just seems like a big price for a side who haven't really added anything from last season. They've still got a brilliant group of centre-backs, and they've added to that with Ben White coming back from Leeds. But I would be very surprised if you don't get a decent run for your money at 4-1, because I still think in the position that Brighton are in as a club, it's not too different to when Chris Hughton was there. And I think, securing safety whilst playing the brand of football that Potter's trying to implement would still be a job well done. So fingers crossed I'm wrong for Brighton fans, but I just think there might be a bit of juice in that price myself. We'll go on now to, and quickly I was just going to say, because Southampton are basically the only club we haven't mentioned, right bang in the middle. So all I'm going to do is just ask you, would you rather back them at 13-8 for a top half finish, or at 4-7 for a bottom half finish? Martin, you first.
Neither. Top half. I'll go top half. I think that, they're not going to go down. They're 100% not going to go down. So, and there is a chance that they could get top 10. So, yeah.
And Jonathan?
So I'm going to have to do some counting. So Liverpool, City, Chelsea, United, there's 4. Arsenal, Tottenham will finish above them. Wolves will finish above them.
Then you've got Leicester, Everton, Leeds, West Ham around.
Well, Everton, I think, will finish above them. Leicester probably won't. Leeds, 13-8 to finish top half. Yeah, I'd take that. Yeah.
Okay, good news, Southampton fans.
Can I back them to be 10th exactly?
I'll have a look after the.
Because maybe I'm looking to Dutch them finishing 10th or 11th.
You're testing my my ability to find these markets as quickly as you want by asking for that.
Sheffield United, I think, are really interesting, because obviously they were so good last season, and it was, I don't want to say it was surprising because we knew how they would play, but it was certainly surprising just how effective that was. And I always think it's a fascinating thing when it happens increasingly rarely, when a team comes up and they do something a little bit different, a little bit new, and are they able to evolve as teams see them play and work out what they're doing. And maybe Chris Wilde and Alan Neil are sort of have a sort of infinite imagination where they can keep on finding new tweaks, or maybe everybody's go, okay, you're doing that, well, this is how we stop it, and they plummet. So we're going a long way back here, but the sort of the gold standard of that is Ipswich, when they won the title under Alf Ramsey, and the next season, so that was 61-2, and they played with a withdrawn left winger, which nobody knew how to deal with, and obviously things were very different then because far less stuff was on TV, no video analysis, nothing like that. So people caught up much more slowly. But by the first game of the next season, they lose Charity Shield 5-0 or 5-1 to Tottenham, and they're in the relegation places. But Ramsey took the England job in the March '63. So if you get worked out, you can plummet. So Sheffield United, I think, is really interesting to see how they go next season.
Sheffield United, an interesting one to keep an eye on, certainly. As I say, I think they're going to be announcing 3 or 4 new signings in the next 48 hours, a couple of fullbacks from Derby and a couple others. Onto the top goal scorer market, and it's the likely quartet at the top. Mo Salah is 11-2 favourite, ahead of Harry Kane and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. 6-1, despite the fact Aubameyang has been listed as a midfielder on Fantasy Premier League football this year, which is an interesting one. Sergio Aguero is 8-1. So those are the 4 at the top of the market. Not much between them. Jonathan, who would you think is best set to score the most goals and represent value there?
Well, I think if Aguero's fit, if his knee is working, City certainly need him to score lots of goals. So maybe 8-1's not a bad price there. What price is Jamie Vardy to retain
Jamie
his title?
Vardy is 18-1. 18
So Leicester play to him and through him so much. You always think he's got a decent chance. I mean, Aubameyang scored goals in a bad Arsenal team. This is now a good Arsenal team, so you'd assume he would score more goals. That's just science. So yeah, what price did you say he was? Sorry,
6-1.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, Aubameyang with a little side bet on Vardy maybe.
Okay, Martin.
Yeah, I think from the four, Aubameyang's the value. He looks happy. That's the main thing right now. He looks happy, and he's obviously scoring goals. So yeah, I think Aubameyang's the value from the top four. I think there'll be much of a muchness though between those. I think Timo Verna's the really interesting one, and I don't want to be the guy who just buys into all the hype that Chelsea are just going to be this amazing attacking team next season. But it is impossible. They created a lot of chances last season, and they'll create more this season. I'm not saying that they'll be the perfect team, but they'll create a hell of a lot of chances. And Timo Verna last season came on so much in terms of his finishing that he, I don't know what price he is.
Verna's 12-1.
12-1. Yeah, I like that. I just think he's a complete forward, and yeah, just the chances that they'll create for him, I think he'll put away 20 plus easily. So he'll be up there, and I think 12-1 is a very good price.
I'm going to make a case for a couple of bigger prices, probably more each way chances. You're getting a quarter of the four each way. I think Heung-min Son 80-1 is a fair crack. There's no guarantee that Spurs are going to actually bring in another striker to deputise for Kane. And given the nature of this season with Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, going to be happening a fair bit, you wouldn't think Kane will maybe have the legs to play as much as he has done recently. Some injury problems as well. So I think that'll probably give you a decent run. And I mean, I don't want to jump on the bandwagon, but I mean, Mason Greenwood at 40-1 with SpreadX. Just given that unless they do sign a Jadon Sancho, you can be pretty sure that he's going to play. He's going to start, if he's fit, 30-odd games in the coming season. And his game, even though he's playing on the right-hand side, his game is basically all about goals. And his scoring record coming into the side last season was very strong indeed. And it's a lot to ask for an 18-year-old playing his first full season to go and win the Golden Boot. But at 40-1, a quarter of the four, if we are anticipating United to be, again, as they were last season, a fairly free-scoring team, you have to have Greenwood in for double figures, surely. So for him to be a fair way off the price of, Martial, who's kind of 16-1, 18-1, and Rashford a similar price, I think is just a bit too big. I wouldn't have him far off their goal quotes. So that's a couple from me, I'm afraid. Apologies in advance for a 40-1 and 80-1 loser. And then finally, the sack race is going to be the last market we discuss. Roy Hodgson is the 5-1 favourite at Palace. David Moyes 7-1. Dean Smith 10-1. Steve Bruce 10-1. Scott Parker 11-1. This is a very good one for the oddschecker app because the prices vary massively between the bookmakers. Hodgson is short as 3-1 elsewhere. Parker is short as 5-1. Slovan Bilic, who's 14-1, is 9-1 in other places. So make sure you do check the app before having your bets here. Who, Jonathan, can you see to be the first one to get the chop?
Moyes. Just because the start is so difficult. 5 of the first 7 games against teams who finished in the top 7 last season. And of those, Wolves, the weakest, should be stronger this season because they have fewer other distractions. I think there was huge warning signs towards the end of last season. The performance against Burnley was a terrible performance. So for all they kind of scrapped out results against Chelsea, I just don't trust West Ham at all this season. So, yeah, and also they're owners who they fired him once, and the second kill is always easier than the first. I mean, any hitman will tell you that. The other person who I think is sort of maybe a dark horse to be under pressure is Frank Lampard, precisely because
33-1.
Yeah, precisely because Chelsea are so exciting this season because they have spent so much money. If things don't go right pretty quickly, he's not going to get fired in the first 2 months of a season. But if Villa have an okay start, if West Ham have an okay start, if Fulham have an okay start, and I think we're all anticipating that the disparity between top and bottom will not be as obvious in the first month or two of the season, this season as it often is, because of no proper pre-season. It's there's a random element there which isn't normally there. So I think it is possible we have to wait quite a while for the first sacking. Palace, I guess, they had such a terrible end to, such a terrible post-lockdown period that Hodgson is under immediate pressure. But if they get a couple of wins early on, Hodgson's popular enough there. So I think Lampard could come under pressure if Chelsea are sort of 8th or 9th come October. And we know Abramovich. He doesn't have the sort of the direct control he used to have, or the direct interest he used to have. But I can see that if they will want a quick return on that investment, and if it looks like they're not going to get that, if it begins to look like they're not going to qualify for Champions League, then I think Lampard does come under pressure. I'm not expecting that, but at 33-1, I think it's something worth considering.
33-1 Lampard there, and Moyes at 7-2 for Jonathan. Martin, where are you looking?
I would say Moyes as well, but the only opposition I would have to that would be Hodgson at the moment. I just think he's the one who comes into the season under the most pressure. So, like you say, if Palace have a decent start, then he'll likely be fine. I could see him being fine for the rest of the season. But if they have a poor start, then I think he's under the most pressure immediately. So if they lose like 3-4 of their first 5 games or something like that, when you carry that over from the end of last season, I can see them pulling the trigger faster than anyone else. So it makes sense to me that he's the shortest price.
The only other one who might be worth considering. What price is Rodgers?
He's 25-1.
Right. Purely because they had such a disappointing end to last season, and there's also at least some level of expectation at the club. So again, if it drifts into sort of October and everybody's still there, and say Leicester sort of 13th, 14th, I think he suddenly comes under pressure.
So he's another one. I'm just going to flag Scott Parker as well at 11-1. He's 5-1 with Hills, which I think is about right, even though he signed a new contract and had such a great end to last season. Fulham fans or anyone following the Championship, nobody thought he was doing a particularly good job, really, until they had a brilliant playoff campaign. And given what's at stake, if they have a slow start, I don't think Fulham will be hanging around to try and make an improvement in the dugout, is all I will say to that one. That brings us to an end. We've rattled through about 7 markets there. Thank you very much to both Jonathan and to Martin for enlightening us with their anticipation for the season. We're nearly there now, but make sure you do download the oddschecker app, because throughout the season we will have all the very best bookie offers, always the best prices, the best tipsters as well every weekend. Fingers crossed we've given you a couple of winners for the season ahead, and please do ensure that you gamble responsibly.